The hushed whispers followed Eleanor Evans through the dusty streets of Gold Hill, Colorado, like a persistent shadow she couldn't outrun. At 28, she had long since resigned herself to the sideways glances and barely concealed murmurs about the spinster schoolteacher. In 1878, a woman her age without a husband was considered peculiar at best, a failure at worst, but Eleanor had learned to hold her head high despite the weight of judgment pressing down upon her shoulders. The early autumn air carried a chill as Eleanor made her way to the schoolhouse, clutching her books to her chest. Gold Hill had grown considerably since the mining boom 10 years prior, but it maintained the rugged character of a frontier town. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. "Good morning, Miss Evans," called Mrs. Peterson from the general store's porch, her tone cordial but eyes calculating. "I was just telling my Hattie that if she doesn't find a suitor soon, she might end up," she paused, her gaze flicking over Eleanor's unmarried form with pointed significance. "Teaching." Eleanor smiled tightly. What a fortunate outcome that would be for her. "Good day, Mrs. Peterson." She continued walking, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust from the unpaved street. The schoolhouse appeared ahead, a simple clapboard building painted white, standing as a beacon of progress in a town that still measured a woman's worth by her marital status. Inside, Eleanor arranged her teaching materials for the day's lessons. At least here, surrounded by slates and chalk and eager young minds, she found purpose. The children didn't care that she wasn't someone's wife, they cared only that she could explain long division and recite Shakespeare with equal passion. "Miss Evans." A small voice interrupted her thoughts. 10-year-old Abigail Jenkins stood in the doorway, clutching a paper bundle. "Mama sent these biscuits. She said to tell you they're still warm." Eleanor's face softened. "How thoughtful, Abigail. Please thank your mother for me." She also said. Abigail hesitated, her freckled face scrunching with concentration. "She said not to mind the talk around town. That you're worth 10 of those gossiping hens." Eleanor's throat tightened. Martha Jenkins was one of the few women in Gold Hill who treated Eleanor as more than a cautionary tale. "Your mother is a wise woman." The school bell rang, signaling the start of the day. Children filed in, filling the wooden benches with chatter and laughter. Eleanor pushed aside her personal troubles and focused on her students. By midday, as the children ate their lunches in the schoolyard, Eleanor retreated to her desk with a cup of tea. The sound of hoofbeats outside drew her attention to the window. A man she didn't recognize rode into town on a magnificent chestnut stallion. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the blue Colorado sky. Something about his confident posture caught her attention, but Eleanor chided herself for staring and returned to her lesson plans. The afternoon passed quickly. After dismissing the children, Eleanor stayed behind to prepare for tomorrow's lessons. The schoolhouse grew quiet, the only sounds her movements and the occasional creak of the building settling in the cooling air. "Excuse me, madam." The deep voice startled her. Standing in the doorway was the rider she'd glimpsed earlier. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of weathered denim. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck beneath a well-worn hat. "Can I help you?" Eleanor asked, straightening her posture. "Name's Jackson Graves." He removed his hat, revealing a full head of wavy brown hair with touches of silver at the temples. "I've just purchased the Silversmith Ranch outside of town. Been told you might have some books I could borrow." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Books?" "Yes, madam. Been a while since I had access to a decent collection. The trail doesn't offer much opportunity for reading." "You're a cowboy who reads." The words slipped out before she could stop them, A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Is that so hard to believe? I've found Dickens makes good company on cold nights. Eleanor felt a blush creeping up her neck. I apologize, Mr. Graves. That was presumptuous of me. Of course you're welcome to borrow from our small library. She gestured to the bookshelf against the far wall. It's not much, but we have some classics. More than I've had in years. He approached the shelf, running calloused fingers along the spines with surprising gentleness. You're Miss Evans, I take it? How did you, small town, he said simply. Word gets around when a new property changes hands. They mentioned the schoolteacher might help me with some books. They mentioned me, Eleanor asked, wondering what else they had said. Jackson selected a volume of Emerson's essays. They said you were educated back east. Boston, was it? Yes. I attended a women's college there. She lifted her chin slightly, prepared for the usual dismissive response such information typically elicited from men, but Jackson merely nodded. Fine city, Boston. Too crowded for my taste, but the libraries are something to behold. He tucked the book under his arm. I won't keep you, Miss Evans. Thank you for the loan. He was almost to the door when Eleanor called after him. Mr. Graves, the lending period is 2 weeks. He turned, that smile playing at his lips again. I'll return it promptly. Good evening, Miss Evans. After he left, Eleanor found herself staring at the doorway, perplexed by the encounter. A cattle rancher who read Dickens and had been to Boston. Jackson Graves was an enigma, and Eleanor had always enjoyed a good puzzle. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual. The sunrise painted the mountains in hues of gold and pink, a sight that never failed to take her breath away even after 5 years in Colorado. She had just unlocked the schoolhouse door when the sound of hoofbeats approached. Morning, Miss Evans. Jackson Graves rode up to the hitching post outside the schoolhouse, the same chestnut stallion beneath him. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. Mr. Graves, Eleanor acknowledged, surprised. You finished Emerson already. He reached into his saddlebag and produced the book. Not quite, but I was in town for supplies and thought I'd swap it for something else, if that's agreeable. Of course. She held the door open. Please come in. Inside, Jackson returned to the bookshelf while Eleanor lit the stove to ward off the morning chill. She was acutely aware of his presence in her small domain, a tall, masculine figure among the children's desks. You have Thoreau, he noted, pulling out a volume. I haven't read him since before the war. You fought in the war between the states, Eleanor asked, curiosity piqued. Union cavalry, he confirmed. Seems a lifetime ago now. Eleanor studied him with new interest. He would have been young then, perhaps just 18 or 20 when the conflict began in 61. Now he appeared to be in his late 30s, his face bearing the evidence of years lived outdoors. What brought you to Gold Hill? She asked. Jackson tucked the Thoreau under his arm. Time for a change. I've been moving cattle up from Texas for years, but I'm getting too old to live entirely on the trail. Thought I might try putting down some roots. His eyes met hers. What about you? Boston to a mining town in Colorado is quite a journey. Eleanor busied herself with arranging papers on her desk. I came for the teaching position. There weren't many opportunities back east for a woman who wanted to support herself. No family to return to. My parents passed years ago. I have an aunt in Pennsylvania, but we're not close. She hesitated, then added, Most women my age are well established in their marriages with several children. I chose a different path. And you're judged for it, Jackson said, not a question but a statement of fact. Eleanor looked up sharply. Have you been listening to the town gossip, Mr. Graves? I've been around long enough to recognize how small towns work, he replied. A woman of intelligence and independence is often seen as a threat rather than an asset. Before Eleanor could respond, children's voices sounded outside. Jackson replaced his hat. "Thank you for the book, Miss Evans. Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time." He nodded politely to the children as they streamed in, some staring openly at the tall stranger. Eleanor watched him mount his horse from the window, wondering if he would indeed return. He did return, 3 days later, this time in the afternoon as classes were ending. The children regarded him with curiosity as they filed past him at the door. Jackson waited patiently until the last student had departed before approaching Eleanor's desk. "Mr. Graves," she greeted him. "Finished with Thoreau so soon. I find I have more time for reading now that I'm not constantly moving herds across open country," he replied, handing her the book. "My evenings are quieter than they used to be." Eleanor accepted the volume. "And how are you finding Gold Hill?" "The town itself is pleasant enough. The ranch needs work. Previous owner let things slide, but the land is good." He paused. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening." The invitation caught Eleanor off guard. She stared at him, searching for the joke or ulterior motive in his expression, but found only sincere interest. I'm not sure that would be wise, Mr. Graves." "May I ask why not?" Eleanor sighed. "Mr. Graves, Jackson, please." "Jackson, then. I'm already the subject of enough speculation in this town without being seen dining alone with a bachelor." "Is your reputation so fragile?" he asked, not unkindly. "It's not fragile, it's non-existent," Eleanor replied with unexpected candor. "I'm the spinster schoolteacher who failed to secure a husband. Every action I take is scrutinized through that lens." Jackson considered this. All the more reason to give them something genuine to talk about rather than their imaginings. A laugh escaped her. "You're not helping your case." "Perhaps not." His eyes crinkled with humor. "But I'm new in town. I don't know anyone, and I enjoy your company. It seems a simple enough equation." Eleanor hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had sought out her company for its own sake. "Very well, dinner at the hotel. I'll call for you at 6. "I'll meet you there," she countered firmly. "Let's not add fuel to the fire." Jackson nodded, accepting her terms. "Until this evening, then." When he'd gone, Eleanor sat at her desk, wondering what she'd just agreed to. It wasn't a courtship. She was far too old for such things, and she doubted a man like Jackson Graves had marriage on his mind. Perhaps it was simply what he'd said. Two newcomers sharing a meal and conversation. Still, she found herself smoothing her hair and straightening her collar before leaving the schoolhouse. That evening, Eleanor chose her best dress, a deep blue wool with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. She pinned her hair more carefully than usual and even added a touch of rose water, a luxury she rarely indulged in. As she walked to the hotel, she ignored the stares of townspeople, keeping her gaze fixed ahead. Jackson was waiting in the hotel lobby, clean-shaven and wearing a pressed shirt under a dark waistcoat. He stood when he saw her, and something in his expression made Eleanor glad she'd accepted his invitation. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy despite her years. "Shall we?" The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Gold Hill, which wasn't saying much. Still, the tablecloths were clean, the silverware polished, and the food superior to anything Eleanor could prepare in her small, rented room. They ordered steaks and potatoes, and Jackson requested a bottle of wine. Eleanor was conscious of the other diners' curious glances, but Jackson seemed oblivious, focusing entirely on their conversation. "So what made you decide to become a teacher?" he asked after they'd been served. Eleanor considered the question. "I've always loved learning." My father was a professor at Harvard, and our home was filled with books. When I realized that marriage wasn't in my future, teaching seemed the natural choice. Why wasn't marriage in your future? Jackson asked directly. Eleanor sipped her wine. I was engaged once, shortly after finishing my education. He was a colleague of my father's, a promising young academic. What happened? He decided that a professor's wife should be devoted entirely to advancing her husband's career. I disagreed. I wanted to continue my studies, perhaps even publish. She smiled wryly. We parted ways, and by then I was 23, practically on the shelf. Other opportunities didn't arise. His loss, Jackson said with unexpected vehemence. Eleanor changed the subject. And you? Have you never married in all your years on the trail? A shadow passed over his face. Once. Her name was Sarah. She died in childbirth while I was away driving cattle. Both she and the baby were lost. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said softly. It was 16 years ago now. His gaze was distant. I blamed myself for not being there. Took to the trail permanently after that punishment, perhaps, or just running away. And now you've stopped running. His eyes refocused on her. It seems that way. They finished their meal in companionable conversation, discovering shared interests in literature, music, and even politics, though Jackson admitted he hadn't voted since Lincoln's re-election, being usually far from polling stations during elections. As they exited the hotel, Eleanor was keenly aware of Mrs. Peterson and two other members of the Ladies' Aid Society watching from across the street. She stiffened slightly, but Jackson placed a gentle hand at the small of her back. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Would you like me to walk you home?" "That's not necessary." "I'd like to, if you don't mind." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Very well." They walked slowly through the town, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. The air had cooled considerably, and Eleanor was grateful for her wool shawl. "I enjoyed this evening," Jackson said as they approached her small house at the edge of town. "So did I," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've had such stimulating conversation." They stopped at her gate. Jackson looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you again?" "For what purpose, Mr. Graves?" Eleanor asked, needing clarity. "To continue our acquaintance. To see where it leads." He smiled slightly. "To borrow more books." Eleanor couldn't help but smile in return. "I suppose that would be acceptable." "Good night, then, Miss Evans." He took her hand and raised it briefly to his lips, a courtly gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance, but somehow suited him perfectly. "Good night, Mr. Graves," she replied, withdrawing her hand and hurrying inside before he could see the blush rising to her cheeks. The next morning at school, Eleanor could tell that news of her dinner with Jackson had spread. The older children exchanged knowing looks, while several parents lingered longer than necessary when dropping off their children, clearly hoping to glean information. Martha Jenkins, Abigail's mother, was more direct. "I see you at dinner with the new rancher last night," she said as she handed Eleanor a jar of preserves. "Word travels fast," Eleanor commented wryly. "It's a small town," Martha replied. "For what it's worth, I think it's wonderful. He seems like a decent man, and you deserve some happiness." "It was just dinner, Martha." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Everything starts somewhere." She squeezed Eleanor's arm. "Don't let the gossips chase away a good thing." Throughout the day, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting to Jackson. It was foolish, she knew. At 28, she was long past the age of romantic daydreams. And yet, there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, a recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. A week passed without word from Jackson, and Eleanor told herself it was for the best. Then, on Saturday afternoon, as she was hanging washing behind her small house, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Jackson Graves rode into view, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Good afternoon, Miss Evans," he called, dismounting. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Eleanor replied, hastily wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you by? I thought you might enjoy a ride." He nodded toward the mare. "This is Daisy. She's the gentlest horse on my property and perfect for someone who doesn't ride regularly." Eleanor glanced at the horse, then back at Jackson. "You want me to go riding with you? Now, if you're amenable. It's a fine day and there's a spot by the river I thought you might appreciate." He smiled. "I've packed a picnic." The idea was tempting. Eleanor hadn't been on horseback in years, not since her college days when a friend's family had invited her to their country estate. And the day was indeed beautiful, crisp autumn air, clear blue skies. "I'd need to change," she said, glancing down at her work dress. "I'll wait," Jackson replied, settling against the fence post with the easy patience of a man accustomed to long hours on the trail. 20 minutes later, Eleanor emerged in a simple riding skirt she'd fashioned years ago, but rarely had occasion to wear. Jackson helped her mount Daisy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, one that she quickly dismissed as she focused on remembering how to sit properly in the saddle. They rode out of town, following a trail that wound alongside Clear Creek. The aspen trees were turning golden, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. Eleanor found her confidence returning as Daisy proved to be as gentle as promised, responding easily to the slightest pressure of the reins. "You ride well," Jackson observed. "I suspected you might have some experience." "It's been many years," Eleanor admitted, "but it's coming back to me." They reached a bend in the river where a grassy bank offered a perfect spot for their picnic. Jackson spread a blanket beneath a large cottonwood tree and unpacked bread, cheese, sliced apples, and a bottle of cider. "This is lovely," Eleanor said, accepting a cup of cider from him. "I rarely venture this far from town." "The countryside around Gold Hill is magnificent," Jackson replied, settling beside her on the blanket. "That's what drew me to this place, the land itself, not the community." Eleanor teased gently. Jackson's expression grew serious. "Communities can be built, Miss Evans. The right people in the right place can create something meaningful." "Eleanor," she said suddenly, "if we're to be friends, you should call me Eleanor." "Friends," he repeated, his eyes holding hers. "Is that what we are?" "I'm not sure what we are, Mr. Graves Jackson. I only know that I enjoy your company more than I expected to." He smiled at that. "The feeling is mutual." They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the rush of the creek and the occasional call of a bird. Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. There had always been expectations pressing on her, to be the perfect daughter, the perfect student, then the perfect teacher. Here with Jackson, she felt no pressure to be anything but herself. "May I ask you something personal?" Jackson said eventually. Eleanor nodded, curious. "You regret not marrying, not having children?" The question caught her off guard. I've never really allowed myself to dwell on it," she admitted. "My life took a different path. I focus on my students, on the difference I can make through education." "That's not an answer," Jackson observed gently. Eleanor looked out at the river, gathering her thoughts. "Sometimes," she said finally, "on cold winter nights when my little house feels too empty, or when I see mothers with their children and recognize that particular joy I'll never know." She met his gaze. "But I don't regret maintaining my independence. I've seen too many women subsumed entirely by their husbands' lives, losing themselves in the process." "It doesn't have to be that way," Jackson said quietly. "A true partnership respects both people for who they are." "Is that what you had with Sarah?" "We were working toward it," he replied. "We were young, still learning each other. I like to think we would have found that balance eventually." He paused. "What about your students? Do they fill that maternal need?" Eleanor considered the question. "They bring joy, certainly, purpose. But it's different. They come to me, learn what I can teach them, and move on. The relationship is temporary by design." "And you wish for something more permanent?" It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Sometimes, yes." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. Jackson told stories of his cattle drives, the stars over the Texas plains, the crossing of the Red River, the characters he'd met along the way. Eleanor shared tales of her more spirited students and the challenges of teaching children from diverse backgrounds with varying levels of previous education. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Jackson packed up their picnic. "We should head back before dark," he said, offering his hand to help Eleanor to her feet. The ride back to town was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Eleanor's house, she noticed several townspeople watching with undisguised interest. Mrs. Peterson was among them, her disapproving frown visible even from a distance. "Your reputation will suffer for being seen with me," Eleanor murmured as Jackson helped her dismount. He kept his hands at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I've never put much stock in the opinions of people who have nothing better to do than judge others," he replied. "But if you're concerned, I'm not," Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I've been judged by this town for years. At least now they'll have something real to talk about." Jackson's smile reached his eyes. "I'd like to call on you properly, Eleanor. Sunday after church, perhaps." "I'd like that," she replied, returning his smile. True to his word, Jackson was waiting outside the church the following Sunday. Eleanor felt the stares as she walked down the steps to meet him, but for once, she didn't care. He offered his arm and she took it, allowing him to escort her through town to a small cafe that had recently opened on Main Street. Over the next few weeks, their courtship, for Eleanor had to admit that was what it had become, progressed steadily. Jackson called on her regularly, sometimes for dinner at the hotel, sometimes for walks around town. On Saturdays, weather permitting, they rode out to explore the countryside around Gold Hill. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their time together with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Jackson was unlike any man she'd known, thoughtful and well-read, yet practical and unpretentious. He listened when she spoke about her teaching theories or her thoughts on current events, engaging with her ideas rather than dismissing them as many men did with women's opinions. The town's reaction was predictably mixed. Some, like Martha Jenkins, expressed delight at Eleanor's newfound happiness. Others, led by Mrs. Peterson and her circle, clucked disapprovingly about the impropriety of a woman Eleanor's age engaging in what they termed youthful courtship behavior. "It's unseemly," Eleanor overheard Mrs. Peterson saying one afternoon as she passed the general store. "At her age, to be carrying on like a schoolgirl, and him old enough to know better." Eleanor had started to walk away when she heard Jackson's voice reply, "Good afternoon, ladies. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She turned to see him tipping his hat to the group of women, his expression pleasantly neutral despite the tension in the air. "Mr. Graves," Mrs. Peterson acknowledged stiffly. "We were just discussing the upcoming Harvest Festival." "Were you? I thought I heard Miss Evans's name mentioned." His tone remained conversational, but there was steel beneath it. "She's a remarkable woman, isn't she? Gold Hill is fortunate to have a teacher of her caliber shaping the next generation." Mrs. Peterson flushed slightly. "Of course, the children are very fond of her." "As am I," Jackson said simply. Then, spotting Eleanor, he smiled and walked toward her, leaving the women staring after him. You didn't need to do that, Eleanor said as he reached her. I didn't do anything but speak the truth, Jackson replied, offering her his arm. Shall we? As they walked, Eleanor felt a warmth spreading through her chest. It had been a long time since anyone had defended her, stood up for her. The feeling was nice. That evening, as they sat on the porch of her small house after dinner, Jackson took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, a working man's hand, but his touch was gentle. Eleanor, he began, his voice serious, I want you to know my intentions. Her heart skipped a beat. Oh, I came to Gold Hill looking for a place to settle, to build something lasting after years of wandering. His blue eyes held hers steadily. I didn't expect to find someone like you, someone who challenges me, who makes me see the world differently. Eleanor's throat felt tight. Jackson, let me finish, please. He squeezed her hand. I'm not a young man anymore. I've seen enough of life to know what matters. And you matter, Eleanor. Your intelligence, your kindness, your strength, they're rare qualities. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to the next time I'll see you. I feel the same way, Eleanor admitted softly. Jackson's expression lightened. Do you? Because I need you to understand something. I don't care that you're 28. I don't care what this town thinks about appropriate timing for marriage or family. All I care about is that I've found someone worth changing my solitary ways for. Are you proposing, Mr. Graves? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not yet, he replied with a small smile. But I'm telling you that I might soon if you're not opposed to the idea. I wanted to be clear about where I see this headed. Eleanor's mind whirled. Marriage had seemed so far out of reach for so long that she'd trained herself not to think of it. And yet, sitting here with Jackson, his hand warm around hers, it suddenly seemed not only possible but right. I'm not opposed, she said finally. Not at all. He raised her hand to his lips. Good. That's very good to know. The air between them changed after that night. Their conversations took on a new dimension, tentative plans for the future, discussions of shared values and hopes. Jackson spoke of improvements to the ranch house, casually mentioning features he thought Eleanor might appreciate. Eleanor found herself imagining a life beyond the small rented house in town, beyond the confines of the schoolroom. One crisp November afternoon, as they rode along a ridge overlooking the valley, Jackson pointed to a distant structure. That's the Silversmith Ranch, my place. Eleanor shielded her eyes against the sun. The ranch house was larger than she'd imagined, with a wide porch wrapping around its front and one side. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held a dozen or more horses. It's beautiful, she said truthfully. Would you like to see it? Jackson asked. It's not too far. They rode down from the ridge, following a well-worn trail that eventually widened into a proper road leading to the ranch. As they approached, Eleanor saw details she'd missed from a distance: the weathered but solid construction of the main house, the newly repaired fence around the yard, the vegetable garden to one side. Jackson helped her dismount and led her to the porch. It needs work, he admitted as he opened the front door. The previous owner was getting on in years, but the bones are good. Inside, the main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace at one end and wide windows that let in plenty of light. The furniture was sparse but solid: a long table with benches, several chairs arranged near the fireplace, a cabinet that appeared to hold dishes and linens. The kitchen's through there, Jackson said, pointing to a doorway. And there are 3 bedrooms upstairs. The largest has windows facing east and west, so you get both sunrise and sunset. You've thought about which bedroom I'd prefer? Eleanor asked, amused. Jackson's expression grew serious. I've thought about a lot of things, Eleanor. He took her hand and led her to one of the chairs by the fireplace, gesturing for her to sit before taking the chair opposite. "I brought you here today for a reason," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I want you to see this place not as my ranch, but as what it could be, our home." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Eleanor's breath caught. "I know we haven't known each other long," Jackson continued. "By some standards, this is rushed, but at our age, I think we know our own minds." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "This was my mother's. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person." He knelt before her chair, the box extended in his palm. "Eleanor Evans, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you build a life with me here, share my home and my name?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. For so many years, she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood, to a life of service through teaching but never experiencing the partnership of marriage. Now, looking at Jackson's earnest face, she felt as though she'd been waiting for him all along. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." His smile could have lit the room. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and then gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of companionship, respect, and love. When they finally parted, Eleanor laughed softly. "What will the town say? Mrs. Peterson will be scandalized." "Let them talk," Jackson said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You came right on time for me, Eleanor. Not too early, not too late, exactly when we were both ready to recognize what we'd found." "And what is that?" she asked, her hand resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "A second chance," he replied, "for both of us." They decided to marry before Christmas. There was no reason to wait, they agreed. At their age, with their minds made up, a long engagement seemed unnecessary. The news spread through Gold Hill like wildfire, eliciting reactions that ranged from genuine congratulations to barely concealed disapproval. Martha Jenkins immediately offered to host a small gathering to celebrate the engagement. "Nothing extravagant," she insisted when Eleanor tried to decline. "Just a few friends who want to wish you well." The few friends turned out to be most of the town's more progressive elements: the young doctor and his wife, several of the miners and their families, the newspaper editor, and even the mayor, who had always supported Eleanor's educational initiatives. Notably absent were Mrs. Peterson and her circle, who had sent regrets with thin excuses. "Don't mind them," Martha whispered to Eleanor as they arranged refreshments. "They're just upset because your happiness proves them wrong. They've been predicting your lonely spinsterhood for so long that your engagement ruins their narrative." Eleanor laughed. "I never thought of it that way." "It's true," Martha insisted. "Besides, they're jealous. Jackson Graves is quite a successful rancher, war veteran, and not hard on the eyes, if you don't mind my saying so." Eleanor blushed. "I don't mind at all." The party was a success, with genuine warmth and goodwill surrounding the couple. Jackson, initially reserved among so many townspeople, relaxed as the evening progressed, charming Eleanor's friends with his dry humor and thoughtful observations. As they were leaving, Jackson whispered in Eleanor's ear, "What do you think about moving your things to the ranch this weekend? The house is ready, and I've hired a woman from town to help with the heavier cleaning." "Before the wedding?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "I've fixed up the small cabin behind the main house," he explained. "I thought I could stay there until the ceremony." "You'd have the main house to yourself, but we'd be on the same property. You could get used to the place, make any changes you want." The idea was tempting. Eleanor's rented house in town was small and drafty, and the thought of settling into her future home, arranging her belongings and adding her touch to the rooms, was appealing. "What about my teaching position?" she asked. "I've committed to finishing the term." "Of course," Jackson said. "It's only 3 miles to town, an easy ride. I'll escort you each day if you'd like." Eleanor considered it. Living at the ranch would certainly silence some of the gossip. They would be on the same property, but not under the same roof until properly married. And the idea of starting to build their life together, even in this small way, was deeply appealing. Yes, she decided, this weekend would be perfect. The move went smoothly. Eleanor didn't own much. Books were her primary possessions, along with clothing, some kitchen items, and a few pieces of furniture inherited from her parents. Jackson insisted on bringing everything, even the items that duplicated what was already at the ranch. "This is your home now," he said as they arranged her books on shelves in what would become their shared study. "It should contain the things that matter to you." The ranch house transformed under Eleanor's touch. Curtains appeared at windows, colorful quilts softened the beds, and small touches, a vase of dried wildflowers, a bowl of pine cones. Her father's old globe made the spaces feel lived in and loved. Eleanor continued teaching, riding to town each morning on Daisy, who had become her horse in all but name. The children were curious about her move and impending marriage, peppering her with questions that she answered as honestly as age-appropriate constraints allowed. "Will you stop being our teacher when you get married?" asked 8-year-old Thomas Wilson one afternoon. "No," Eleanor assured him. "I'll continue teaching until the end of the school year at least." "My mama says married ladies don't work," piped up another child. Eleanor smiled gently. "Some do, some don't. It depends on the lady and her husband. Mr. Graves supports my teaching." This seemed to satisfy them, and the subject shifted to their upcoming Christmas pageant. Eleanor watched them rehearse their parts, her heart full. She loved these children and the work she did with them. She was grateful that Jackson understood how important teaching was to her identity, not just as an occupation, but as a calling. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Eleanor ordered a new dress from Denver ivory silk with delicate lace trim, more elegant than she would have chosen before, but somehow right for this new chapter in her life. Jackson had the ranch house thoroughly cleaned and painted, and he surprised Eleanor by ordering a new piano for the main room, knowing she played but had been without an instrument since leaving Boston. "It's too much," she protested when the piano arrived, delivered by wagon from the train station in Denver. "It's not nearly enough," Jackson replied, guiding her to the bench. "Play something for me." Eleanor's fingers found the keys, a little stiff from disuse, but soon remembering the Chopin nocturnes she'd loved in her youth. The music filled the house, bringing yet another layer of life to their shared home. 3 days before Christmas, with snow falling gently outside, Eleanor and Jackson were married in the small church in Gold Hill. The building was filled with well-wishers, her students and their families, Jackson's ranch hands and business associates, and even a few of Mrs. Peterson's circle, who had apparently decided that the match was respectable enough to acknowledge after all. Eleanor wore her ivory silk dress with a crown of winter greenery in her hair. Jackson looked handsome in a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. They spoke their vows clearly, their eyes never leaving each other's faces, their joined hands steady and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," announced the minister, beaming at the couple. "Mr. Graves, you may kiss your bride." Jackson's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. When they turned to face their friends, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness. This man, this place, this moment, all of it felt like the culmination of a journey she hadn't known she was on. The celebration afterward was joyful but modest, held in the town hall with food prepared by Martha Jenkins and other friends. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes. Eleanor found herself watching Jackson throughout the evening, the way he thanked each person individually, the respect he showed to even the humblest ranch hand, the warmth in his eyes whenever they met hers across the room. As the evening drew to a close, Jackson came to her side. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Graves?" he asked softly. The name, her new name, sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Yes," she replied, "I'm ready." They rode back to the ranch in a sleigh Jackson had borrowed for the occasion, wrapped in warm blankets against the cold, the moon lighting their way through the snow-covered landscape. The ranch house glowed with lamplight, welcoming them home. Inside, a fire burned in the fireplace and the rooms were warm. Eleanor felt suddenly shy, aware that tonight would be different from all the nights before. Jackson seemed to sense her nervousness. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, helping her remove her cloak. "Or perhaps something stronger to ward off the chill?" Eleanor smiled gratefully. "Tea would be lovely." While he busied himself in the kitchen, she went upstairs to change out of her wedding dress. In the bedroom, their bedroom now, she found that her nightgown and robe had been laid out on the bed, a small vase of winter berries placed on the dresser. Jackson had thought of everything. When she came back downstairs in her robe, Jackson was waiting by the fire, 2 cups of tea on the small table between the chairs. He had removed his jacket and tie, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, giving him a more relaxed appearance. "Come sit with me," he invited, holding out his hand. Eleanor joined him by the fire, accepting both his hand and the tea he offered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional moan of the winter wind outside. "Happy?" Jackson asked finally. "Very," Eleanor replied truthfully. "I never expected to find this a partnership, a home, a future with someone who sees me as I am." "I see you," Jackson confirmed, his gaze intense. "I've seen you from the first day in that schoolhouse. Your strength, your intelligence, your heart. You're extraordinary, Eleanor." She set down her teacup and moved to kneel beside his chair. "So are you, my love. Thank you for waiting for me. You came right on time," he reminded her, cupping her face in his hands. "Not a moment too soon or too late." Their lips met in a kiss that deepened quickly, years of solitude giving way to newfound passion. Jackson stood, drawing Eleanor to her feet and into his arms. Without breaking their embrace, he swept her up and carried her toward the stairs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Graves," he whispered against her hair. "Welcome home," she echoed, her heart full to bursting with love and hope for their shared future. The first months of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. After years of independence, Eleanor had to learn to consult another person when making decisions. Jackson, accustomed to the solitary life of a rancher, needed to remember that his actions now affected his wife as well. But they found their rhythm quickly, their natural compatibility smoothing over the rough spots. Mornings began with shared coffee before Eleanor rode to the schoolhouse. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading aloud to each other or discussing the events of their days. At night, they discovered the joys of physical intimacy tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence as they learned each other's bodies and desires. Winter gave way to spring, bringing new life to the ranch. Calves were born, the garden was planted, and Eleanor found herself thinking more and more about children of her own. At 29, she knew that time wasn't entirely on her side, but she had always assumed that motherhood was a door that had closed for her years ago. Now, unexpectedly, it had reopened. She broached the subject one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of pink and gold. "Jackson," she began, her hand finding his, "I've been thinking about our family." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Have you now?" "Yes. I know I'm not young, but I think I hope that we might still have children of our own." Jackson's smile was tender. "I'd like nothing better, Eleanor. A child with your intelligence and spirit would be a gift beyond measure. You're not concerned about my age." "My mother had my youngest sister at 34, he replied. "And you're as healthy as any woman I've ever known. But if it doesn't happen, we'll find other ways to fill our home with love." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, grateful once again for his understanding and support. "I love you, Jackson Graves. And I love you, Eleanor Graves, more than I ever thought possible." By summer, Eleanor had news to share. The nausea that had plagued her mornings for weeks was not, as she'd initially thought, a result of the new well water, but something far more significant. Dr. Williams confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was expecting a child, due in early winter. Jackson's reaction was everything Eleanor could have hoped for. His face lit with joy, and he gathered her close, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach as if to protect the tiny life within. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Eleanor asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," Jackson replied, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd have this chance again to be a father, to see my child grow, and with you as their mother." He shook his head, overwhelmed. "It's more than I deserve." Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. "It's exactly what you deserve, my love. What we both deserve after so many years of waiting." Word of Eleanor's pregnancy spread quickly through Gold Hill. The reactions were as varied as they had been to her engagement: genuine happiness from friends like Martha Jenkins, polite congratulations from acquaintances, and barely concealed surprise from those who had considered her too old for such blessings. Mrs. Peterson, encountering Eleanor at the general store, pursed her lips as she eyed Eleanor's slightly thickening waistline. "Well, isn't this fortunate?" she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "At your age, too, let's hope everything goes smoothly." Before Eleanor could respond, Martha stepped between them. "What a kind concern, Mrs. Peterson. Though I'm sure you know that Eleanor's mother had her at 31 and her grandmother had children well into her 30s, strong women in that family." She smiled sweetly. "But your concern is noted." Mrs. Peterson huffed and moved away, leaving Eleanor and Martha stifling laughter behind their hands like schoolgirls. "The nerve of some people," Martha muttered. "As if bringing a child into a loving home with two mature, stable parents is something to be concerned about." Eleanor's pregnancy progressed normally, much to her relief. She continued teaching through the fall term, though Jackson insisted on accompanying her to and from school each day as her condition advanced. By November, with snow threatening and her body increasingly unwieldy, Eleanor reluctantly agreed to take leave from her position until after the baby's birth. "The children understand," she told Jackson after her last day. "They've made cards for the baby and promises to visit in the spring." "You're a wonderful teacher," Jackson said, helping her into the sleigh for the ride home. "But right now, your most important job is taking care of yourself and our child." December arrived with heavy snows that blanketed the ranch in white. Eleanor, now in her final month of pregnancy, spent her days preparing for the baby's arrival. The small room adjacent to their bedroom had been transformed into a nursery, with a cradle built by Jackson's own hands and a rocking chair positioned near the window, where Eleanor imagined sitting with their child, watching the seasons change outside. In the quiet evenings, as she sewed tiny garments or read books on infant care, Eleanor often caught Jackson watching her with an expression of wonder and contentment. They had both traveled long, sometimes lonely roads to find each other, but now on the cusp of expanding their family. The journey seemed not just worthwhile but necessary, each step leading precisely to where they were meant to be. On a clear, cold morning just after Christmas, Eleanor woke to the first pains of labor. She lay still for a moment, measuring the sensation, then gently shook Jackson awake. "It's time," she said simply. His eyes flew open, instantly alert. "The baby's coming, are you certain?" "Reasonably certain," Eleanor replied with a small smile, then winced as another contraction began. "Yes, quite certain." Jackson sprang into action, sending a ranch hand to fetch Dr. Williams and Martha Jenkins, who had promised to assist with the birth. He helped Eleanor walk slowly around the bedroom, supporting her through each contraction, his face a mixture of concern and excitement. Dr. Williams arrived promptly, his medical bag in hand and his manner reassuringly calm. Martha followed shortly after, bringing fresh linens and her considerable experience with childbirth. "Everything looks to be progressing normally," the doctor assured them after examining Eleanor. "First babies often take their time, so settle in for a long day, Mrs. Graves." The doctor was right. Labor was long and at times frightening in its intensity. Eleanor, who had always prided herself on her composure, found herself crying out as the contractions peaked, grateful for Jackson's steady presence beside her, his hand never leaving hers. As the winter sun began to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in golden light, Eleanor gave a final, exhausted push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Williams announced, placing the squirming infant on Eleanor's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Eleanor's tears fell freely as she gazed at the tiny face of her son, red and wrinkled and perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Jackson leaned close, his finger gently tracing the baby's cheek. "He's beautiful," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like his mother." After the baby had been cleaned and swaddled, and Eleanor made comfortable, Dr. Williams and Martha discreetly withdrew, leaving the new family alone together. Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders as she nursed their son for the first time. "What shall we call him?" Eleanor asked, watching the baby's small fist curl around her finger. "I thought perhaps William, after your father," Jackson suggested. "William Jackson Graves." "William Jackson," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. The baby's eyes, dark blue like most newborns, seemed to focus on her face for a moment. "I think he approves." "Welcome to the world, William Jackson Graves," Jackson said solemnly. "You are very loved, young man, very loved indeed." Later, as darkness fell and the baby slept peacefully in his cradle, Jackson returned to Eleanor's side. She had dozed off briefly but woke as he took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For this day. For our son. For choosing me when you could have continued your independent life." Eleanor smiled tiredly. "It wasn't really a choice, Jackson. Once I knew you, once I loved you, there was no other path I wanted to take." He kissed her forehead gently. "Rest now, my love. Our journey is just beginning." As Eleanor drifted back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that her husband watched over their son in the cradle nearby, she reflected on the twists and turns that had brought her here. The years of being judged and found wanting, the whispers about her unmarried state, the assumption that her time had passed, all of it faded in importance against the reality of the life she now lived. She had not come too late to love, to marriage, to motherhood. She had come exactly when she was meant to, when she and Jackson were ready to recognize in each other the partner they had each been waiting for. She had come right on time. Spring came to Gold Hill with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Will, as they had begun to call him, was 4 months old, a cheerful baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined expression. He had thrived through the winter, growing stronger each day under the watchful eyes of his adoring parents. Eleanor had resumed teaching part-time, bringing Will with her to the schoolhouse 3 days a week. The arrangement was unconventional, but the school board had agreed to it rather than lose their most qualified teacher. The students were entranced by the baby, taking turns holding him during their lunch break under Eleanor's supervision. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in May, Jackson suggested they have a picnic by the river, the same spot where they had shared their first outing together nearly a year before. "A family tradition in the making," he said as he helped Eleanor spread a blanket beneath the cottonwood tree, now lush with new leaves. Will lay on the blanket between them, kicking his legs energetically and cooing at the dappled sunlight filtering through the branches above. Eleanor watched him with a heart full to bursting with love. "I never knew I could be this happy," she confessed, running her finger along Will's plump cheek. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Jackson took her hand. "Not a dream, Eleanor. Just life as it should be, as it can be when you find the right person to share it with. When you find them at the right time," she added, thinking of all the circumstances that had brought them together, his decision to settle in Gold Hill, her choice to remain unmarried rather than accept a lesser partnership, the timing that had allowed their paths to cross when they were both ready to recognize what they'd found. "Speaking of time," Jackson said, reaching into the picnic basket, "I have something for you." He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Eleanor accepted it curiously, untying the bow and unwrapping what appeared to be a book. But when she opened the cover, she realized it was a journal, blank pages bound in soft leather with her new initials, E.G., embossed on the front. "I thought you might want to write our story," Jackson explained. "For Will and perhaps for other children who might join our family someday." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Are you saying?" Jackson smiled. "I'm saying that we have room in our hearts and our home for more love if we're so blessed. Will is only the beginning of our story, Eleanor. There are many chapters yet to be written." Eleanor leaned across their son to kiss her husband, this man who had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. "I'll start tonight," she promised. "Our story deserves to be told." As the afternoon sun warmed them, Eleanor watched Jackson lift their son high above his head, eliciting delighted gurgles from the baby. She thought about the journal waiting to be filled with their memories and experiences, with the everyday miracles of their shared life. She would begin with how they met the schoolteacher past her prime, and the cowboy looking for a place to call home. She would write about the whispers and judgments they had both endured, the paths that had seemed closed to them, and the unexpected opening of a door neither had been looking for. And she would record the words that had healed something broken inside her, words spoken by a man who saw beyond society's arbitrary timelines to the woman she truly was. "You came right on time for me," because she had. They both had. And in that perfect timing lay the miracle of their love story, a story still unfolding, day by day, season by season, in the life they were building together. In the years that followed, Eleanor did indeed fill that journal and several others. She wrote of Will's first steps, taken across the porch toward his father's outstretched arms. She recorded his first words, the way he followed Jackson around the ranch as soon as he could walk, and his immediate and complete adoration of his baby sister, Catherine, born 2 years later. She wrote about the growth of the Silversmith Ranch under Jackson's careful stewardship, and of her own evolution from schoolteacher to education advocate, eventually helping to establish Gold Hill's first proper high school. She documented the changing town, the arrival of the railroad, the gradual softening of even Mrs. Peterson's attitude as she watched the Graves family thrive. Most of all, Eleanor wrote about love, the kind that comes unexpectedly, that defies conventional wisdom and arbitrary deadlines. The kind that recognizes worth beyond youth and beauty, that values intelligence and character, that sees potential where others see limitation. The kind of love that arrives precisely when it's needed most, not a moment too soon or too late, but right on time.